Today, Yoon-Sook has the ability to see strings that connect people. Blue strings connecting sexual partners, and black strings connecting murderers and their victims. But what happens when Yoon-Sook all of a sudden sees a black string connected to her? This is string number 1. Hello there, Comic Clan, and welcome to Comics in the Cross, the greatest YouTubers that you've never heard of. I, of course, am your host for today, Cross, and we are back with another comic book review for you today. I am checking out string number 1 from Mad Cave Studios. But before we get into today's issue, a little bit of housekeeping. If you do enjoy our content and don't want to miss out on any of our future videos, then go on down, hit that subscribe button. You'll be doing us a solid in helping us continue to grow this channel. We greatly appreciate it. And also, if you can hit that like button, it really does help us out in the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much. But alright, all the boring stuff out of the way, I am ready to delve in to string number 1. Let's do this. String number 1 is written by Paul Tobin, with artwork from Javier Olivares. Colours are by Sara, Colella, and lettering from Taylor Esposito. Our issue begins with very little context to what's going on. We see a man in a hooded jacket holding up a dog in front of him by the scruff of the neck. He then proceeds to throw the dog, like overhand, throw this dog straight towards our protagonist Yoon-Sook and the person that is with her, who we will come to know as Detective Luke Mayfield. The man then unzips his jacket, revealing that he is strapped with dynamite, and says, "F everything." We then jump to 8 hours earlier in the day, and we're at the Seattle Police Department's North Precinct. Yoon-Sook is arriving for her first meeting with Detective Luke Mayfield. As she makes her way through the police department and up in the elevator, we quickly see that she seems to have a bit of a reputation in the building, as most people are in in-depth conversations until they realise that she's nearby, and then all of a sudden, everybody goes quiet. Everyone immediately stops talking, and most people seem to find a reason to leave the immediate vicinity of her. As Luke meets Yoon-Sook, they are shocked to find that the office is all of a sudden empty. Yoon-Sook explains that it is likely due to her ability. She has the ability to see 2 different types of strings that connect people and that are invisible to everybody else. The first string that she can see is black, and it connects a murderer with their murder victim. The second string that she can see is blue, and this connects people that have had sexual intercourse with one another. Yoon-Sook attempts to point out an example of the strings to the detective. She sees one connecting a man and a woman that are nearby and mentions it to him. Unfortunately, Yoon-Sook inadvertently proves why most people get weird around her with regards to the strings, as the woman that she points out as having had recently slept with the man that was near her turns out to be the woman that Luke is dating, or at least the woman they were dating. Luke decides it's probably best for them to get out of the office right now, so they head out to go and grab some lunch before heading to the morgue. As they go out and grab some pizza, Luke starts to become curious and decides to ask more about the strings. Yoon-Sook tells them she's an open book, what do they want to know, and she's quite happy to answer. She does give him a freebie up front, telling him most people want to know what strings can I see right now. And she says, "I can't see any black strings, but I do see about 10 to 12 blue strings in here of varying intensities." It also means there's probably more strings in here than that, but they're too old that I can't actually see them. Luke becomes curious and starts to delve a little deeper, asking, "Can you see any further information connected to the strings?" And she responds, "No, just the strings themselves." Luke delves deeper and asks when she started seeing the strings, and Yoon-Sook tells him that it was when she was 14 and they started following her parents' death. She was on a student exchange 12,000 miles away when they were gunned down. Following this, she started seeing strings, and even to this day when she visits their graves, she can sometimes see black strings for just a few moments, although they never last long enough for her to follow them anywhere. Her therapist, or a number of therapists, have said that the trauma of her parents' murder is what has caused her to see the connections between people. Although Luke disagrees, as the successes within her file state that it's more than just a coincidence, and even goes to call it boss level. As they make their way to the morgue, Luke asks her if there's anything that she can do about the disappearing strings from her parents' grave, if there's any way that she can focus on them and make them stick around longer. Yoon-Sook describes it like seducing someone. That you can turn all the switches you want, but if you don't have consent, then nothing's happening. Luke comments that that was a really weird analogy, and Yoon-Sook says, well, she's a really weird woman. Alright, since String's going to go out of its way to mention the dialogue sounding bizarre at this point, I would usually save this for the end for part of my wrap up and my thoughts on the comic, but since it's doing it, I'm going to choose to do it as well and mention the fact of just how freaking bizarre some of the dialogue choices are in this and just how unnatural sounding they are. Like, the consent line there is, we'll start with that one since that's the one that they kind of mentioned, oh, that sounds weird, although that's been mentioned previously as well. Yes, it is weird. It's very bizarre because it doesn't make sense. Not only is it a strange analogy, kind of like what Luke said, but like it literally doesn't make sense because, you know, it's insinuating that she needs almost like the consent of the strings to be able to properly follow them and properly get to places, and I'm like, and that's just not the case in the pages that we've seen leading up to this. It's not the case that she's ever needed consent, if you want to give it that terminology. The strings are essentially throwing themselves in her face, and she'll even go to mention later on the fact of, like, when she used to see the strings for the first time, like originally it felt overwhelming because she would see all these strings. She's gotten used to it now, but that doesn't sound like someone getting consent or having to receive consent to follow the strings. It sounds like they're just throwing themselves there. You know, there's no, like, button flicking required to get it. It feels like it's shoehorned in to try and touch on a hot topic issue. To try and get in beliefs of like, oh, this is what we believe in this situation. Obviously in reference to, you know, the hot button topic of talking about consent, talking about the whole Me Too movement that happened, that kicked off a number of years ago, and the changing of, like, you know, it's like a woman's body, a woman's rights, and it feels like they're trying to shoehorn in the fact of like, oh, we're getting this in here and showing like, look, we're standing on this side, we're standing on this side of a social justice conversation. And it does the same earlier as well when they're in the cafe. And there's a little bit of banter between Yoon-Sook and Luke, where Yoon-Sook says to Luke that, you know, if he's one of the good guys, and he says, well, I've got a badge. Excuse me. They say, well, I've got a badge, and Yoon-Sook says, so do you think all cops are good guys? To which Luke's response is, I need to have a drink in me to be able to be completely honest with stuff like that. Obviously insinuating the belief that not just because someone's a cop doesn't automatically make them a good person, which has been a real hot button topic in recent years as well. The problem is it feels shoehorned in and unearned in the conversations. Like it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like it fits in the conversation. It doesn't feel like it's part of what's taking place. Not to mention anyone I know who does hold these beliefs, who does have issues with, you know, not all cops are good guys, or, you know, trying to stand on, you know, consent above all things. You know, if a woman says no, it means no, that sort of stance. It's like, anyone who does actually hold those beliefs, I never hear them talking like this. Excuse me. It comes across more as someone who is just trying to portray that they have these beliefs. And I don't know what the creative team's actual beliefs are, what their standings are on anything. I don't know. This is just the way it feels, is it someone who doesn't necessarily believe that, trying to shoehorn in a belief and make it look like, oh, we're touching these buttons. Either A, to make it look like they have those beliefs, or B, to try and draw a crowd because, ooh, this comic is talking about these social situations, these political situations, these different things, to try and draw in certain people to come and check out the comic. Which I think in the long run with this story, it actually hinders it. In the long run with this, the dialogue and the way that they're shoehorning stuff in, and even just the conversational dialogue within the story, I feel like it hinders the story itself. Because especially with Yoon-Sook, her dialogue, I believe, is meant to come across as like strange and bizarre and quirky, but it really doesn't come across in the right way that I think they were trying to go for. And even like other people's dialogues, like, you know, Luke's meant to be the straight man to the comedic man sort of stance, and it's like they don't really have that stance either of like, you know, giving the correct responses. It all seems a bit off. I mean, even like the way he starts asking about the strings, is like he starts to come across like, I feel like it's meant to be more sex positive, some of the conversation, because they start to have conversations about the blue strings in the most bizarre times. But Luke seems to be really harping on about these blue strings and what they mean, and can she see into the future with them? Like, can she see it connect to someone who he's going to get laid, you know? And it's like, you're just like, he's by the end of the issue, he starts to sound a bit more like a, you know, a sex pest than he does like someone curiously asking about the strings. And the thing is, I think it hinders the story overall, because all of this time, all of this dialogue, all of the focus on these things could easily have gone elsewhere in helping the story. But I will get into that more at the end of this. Let me jump in and actually finish the overview of the comic. Off my soapbox, rant finished. Let's get back into the comic. Yoon-Sook and Luke go into the morgue, and Luke states the bodies in here are from cold cases, and they've all been in here 5 years or more. Their captain is hoping that Yoon-Sook could take a look and see if she's able to find a black string and give them at least some sort of lead and point them in the right direction. But before Luke can finish their sentence, Yoon-Sook is already bolting out the door in pursuit of a black string in hopes of following it before it disappears. Luke and Yoon-Sook take off running towards Luke's car in the hopes of pursuing the string before it disappears. And of course, while driving after the black string, Luke decides now's the best opportunity to try and get some more information about the strings and how they work. What better time to ask about the blue strings than when you're pursuing a black string in a murder case? Of course. Be forewarned, I'm not going to be forgiving of the description of this next part, just because this is another sign of the dialogue just shoehorning in stuff that just felt so out of place and weird. Luke decides that while they're running down this black string, it's the best opportunity to ask about the blue strings, and asks, it connects people who have had sexual intercourse, but does it have to be like penetrative sex? Can it be any sort of sexual activity? Can it be any sort of sexual connection or sexual touch? And it's interesting that Yoon-Sook's response is that, oh, that's a weird question, which, don't get me wrong, I thought the same thing. It's a weird question. Not the question itself, but the fact of, like, we're in the middle of pursuing this cold case and we've got the first lead that this has possibly had in years. And the question he's asking is about, you know, if I do something with my girlfriend, is it going to show as much as if we have full penetrative intercourse? And it's it's just bizarre kind of placement for this conversation. The thing that I find really bizarre though is that Yoon-Sook finds it bizarre only to then immediately answer the question, and then the answer she gives dives into so much detail. Because she could have said she could have said yes or no, and I've done some stuff to kind of test it. But she goes into detail of the fact of that she basically hired an entire sex club to test this theory, and somehow it was connected to someone who was paying for it, all in the hopes of finding out if their partner was cheating or not. Which, you know, like, spoiler for that, they were, but she was happy about it because it was a turn on for her. But basically, yeah, she hired out a whole sex club and tracked the sort of strings that were created, and the strings were even created from different types of sexual contact. And I'm like, this is a very in-depth explanation, which I could understand if he's asking questions. Like, because that would cross my mind as well, like, because you start to ask deeper questions, you start to wonder, is this going to affect things? Would this count as it? Like, does that create, like, she described more intense strings. And it's like, so would this create, like, a dimmer string? Would this create not a stable string? Would this still create just the same sort of string? Like, of course, because you don't understand the power, you want to get it. It just still feels like such a bizarre time to ask the question when we're in the pursuit of this black string. And it's like, I would have thought maybe like, okay, is he going to ask some questions around the black strings and how it connects? And because we kind of touched on it earlier in the comic. So it just felt like very bizarre placement for this. And another example of the dialogue just really throwing the story in a direction that it felt like it was shoehorning in information because, well, people are going to be reading this comic, they're going to want to know about the blue strings, they're going to want to know about the sex part. You know, which of course people are going to want. The sex sells. One of the strings that she sees is about sexual partners. Readers are going to naturally be curious and ask questions. They just are. And it felt like, well, we have to shoehorn this in for people because they'll want to read it, rather than actually going in a journey that felt natural to the story with this. But again, I digress on another rant. Trust me, I'm being very calm with these rants, these could go a lot longer. They finally reach their location, with the string having led them to a condemned parking garage. And while they are there, Yoon-Sook sees the black string connecting to a red van adorned with a skull that is fleeing the garage. They race back to Luke's car and begin a pursuit of the suspected murderer. Luke tells Yoon-Sook that they are going to stay back and tail them for now, as not that he is questioning her abilities, but they don't technically have any solid evidence with which to actually arrest them, and Luke isn't sure how to handle it. However, during the pursuit, he spots them trying to follow his van, and then tries to flee by weaving through the traffic of the city. He loses control and ends up cornered, which is when we find ourselves back at the first page of our issue, with Yoon-Sook and Luke staring down the man as he throws his dog at them and shows he is wrapped in dynamite. As Yoon catches the dog, Luke dives on top of her just in time to cover her from the blast, as the man they were pursuing sets off the dynamite and blows himself up. We then jump forward 5 hours and join Yoon-Sook back at her apartment alongside the dog. It's been left in her care as the police go through all the paperwork surrounding its former owner after the situation that happened. Yoon-Sook is ready for a night in. She pours herself some wine and gets herself some pizza. But as the issue comes to a close, Yoon-Sook is caught off guard when she realises that there is a black string in her apartment, and the string is connected to her. Alright, I want to start off with a big positive for this, and that is 100% the concept of string. It was the whole reason I wanted to check it out. I thought this was going to be a really cool thing. I thought this was going to be such a great premise for a series. Someone having that ability to see strings that are interconnecting people, and the way to tell a story with that, of telling a story of being able to connect the murderer to the victim. The stories have been able to connect someone who's sleeping with someone else. And just to see what they could do with that concept of someone who can see the relationships and connections with people. And I've been really intrigued. I think it depends where the series goes from here, but I don't know about her seeing the black string connected to herself, if that was a first issue thing, or if that should have been a later thing. Excuse me. I feel like her being able to work with the police and see things would have been something to really play on a bit more, but obviously as well, I don't know where the story's going, but that was just my initial kind of thought of it. I would also love to see if it was more than just the 2 colour strings. What if there's a way to see other strings and other colour strings forming other relationships? So all those sort of things I thought would be cool expansions for it, but it depends where the story's going, and this is all based on the first issue. That the idea alone is such a cool concept that I wanted to see what they could explore with it. Other positives for it, Carlos Javier Olivares, if I'm saying his name correctly. Olivares, I think. Sorry, my tongue just was not getting that out there. Like, I've got it on the screen, like even on here, because I can see and I'm trying to like say it, and like my tongue was not going in that direction with that, so I apologize. But Carlos's artwork for the most part is absolutely beautiful. I love the artwork in this. Sara, can you tell I'm recording this a little bit later at night? My brain and tongue have stopped working in unison with each other. Sara Colella, her colouring for it, I really like the colouring in terms of the story. It felt like everything was bright but also a little bit muted. I thought I loved the designs of the strings and the way it was all coloured and connected to one another. I thought overall the art was amazing. There was a couple of scenes where the art just looked a little off, especially with Yoon-Sook's face, and there was a couple of points where there was like a side shot of her head and the face just did not look like a face, like a human face at least. And that's just me. Possibly, like, other people might think it looks okay, but in my opinion, I thought the art was just off a little bit in a couple of panels, but overall it was fairly good. My big letdown for this comic, I think, was definitely the writing. I did not think that the story in this first issue was compelling. I felt like it was... Honestly, I felt like there was a lot of filler. I felt like stuff that was actually substantial and actually worthwhile was probably about half the issue. About half the issue you could have cut out and not really have missed that much. I think the biggest letdown though was the dialogue. As I'm not going to go into a big rant about it, I did that earlier in the video. But I feel like the dialogue was a big letdown, and it really was something that pulled me out of this world and didn't feel natural, and didn't feel like it lent itself to the story being told in a natural sort of flow. Apologies, my cough is going crazy today. But I felt like the way the story was, the way things were put together, the way the dialogue was in place, it stopped it feeling like a natural flow. It felt like things were put in because they felt like they had to be, or they were trying to convey a certain thing and it didn't come across in a proper way. And honestly, yeah, it really took me out of it. I really wanted to like this comic a lot more than I did. I really thought this would be a really cool, different one, different from the stuff I usually cover, really intriguing story. And honestly, it wasn't great. It may just be a case though that this is just one that's not for me. I mean, it could be meant for a different audience, a younger audience. It could be meant for someone completely different. If you've heard the stuff in this and you think it's for you, by all means go and check it out. For me, I don't think it's one that's worth necessarily going and picking up. it was a miss for me on this one. Not one that I would honestly go and continue reading. I don't think I'll be checking out string number 2, at least in the review. I'll probably read it myself to just kind of see, like, was it a one-off issue that just had some teething pains for the new story? Could it get into it? But I highly doubt it's something that I'm going to do for the channel. Unless issue 2 turns it around, you're probably not going to see it on here. If you do want to see it again, or you think number 2 is going to be worth checking out, by all means let me know and maybe I will check it out and think about it. But at the moment I've got very limited time to look at things, and just this isn't something that I think is worth continuing with. Not when I've got so many great series out there that I'd love to spend my time talking about, and I don't even get to do half of those, 3/4 of those. I'm not going to waste it on something I didn't really think was enjoyable overall. And I hate saying that. I like to try and look at positives and be nice on stuff, but like this was just a complete miss for me. But that's all for us from today. I'm not going to dwell on it too long and go into big rants. I've ranted enough in this video about things, about the stuff I felt like didn't work. But thank you so much for joining me for today's review. I hope you enjoyed this. Well, the review anyway. If you enjoyed the comic, even more power to you. But if you want to get early access to all of our videos, all of our interviews and our Indie Comic Book Club, please go and check out our Patreon. The links are down below. And for as low as $2 a month, you can support Comics in the Cross and get early access to not only our channel, but all of our other YouTube channels, as well as exclusive content. Also, as well, go and check out BCW Supplies for all of your comic book storage and collecting, displaying needs. Use the link down below and use code ComicsCross to save 10% on your purchases. But that's everything for me for today. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Take care, and remember, it's a good week to be a geek. I'll see you all next time. Peace.